Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about initial thoughts from the Justin Fields to the Pittsburgh Steelers deal, which of course leaves a vacancy at the quarterback position for the Chicago Bears and makes it official that they are going to be selecting a quarterback in the upcoming draft. And we are going to be diving into what it looks like for whoever that may be, whether it's Caleb Williams or someone else. But this resonated with me because yesterday, Robert Griffin III, former Washington quarterback, posted on social media a clip of him talking about how Caleb Williams should, quote, pull an Eli Manning and demand that the Chicago Bears do not draft him. He referenced that Caleb Williams should look at the way that things just played out with Justin Fields, the fact that Fields just went for a 6th round pick, and reflect on himself that the Bears may not be able to put him in position to succeed. And I disagreed with this firmly in terms of you look at the situations that Justin Fields walked into when he joined the Bears in 2021 versus where the Bears are at now and the level of talent that is across the roster. Also keeping in mind that Justin Fields was the 4th quarterback selected in his class, and this is Caleb Williams, who should be the consensus number 1 overall pick in this draft. I do think that, Fields has been, and again, I think that Fields still has potential. He had his best season of his career in my eyes last season. I know that the rushing numbers for himself were down, but I thought that in terms of being an actual passer, we saw the best from Fields up to this point. That being said, though, I've never been entirely sold on him as a pro-level quarterback, and he does deserve some of the blame in this scenario. First couple of years weren't great in terms of what the Bears were able to put around him, but they were trying to make improvements to the roster. Now, I think coming into this upcoming year, no rookie quarterback should be upset with the infrastructure that they have on the offensive side of the ball going into next year, where they just went out and signed running back DeAndre Swift. DJ Moore is still there coming off of a really explosive season, and they get Keenan Allen in a trade for almost nothing, a 4th round pick. Allen having one of the best years of his career with Cole Kmet as well, who's a great red zone threat as well. It's not the best offensive line in the league there in Chicago, but definitely improved from recent years, and as long as they're healthy, they should be middle of the pack. So I don't really see any holes on this offense necessarily outside of the quarterback position. And I wanted to look back a little bit with the past decade or so and look at the other situations that former number 1 overall quarterbacks were drafted into to see how they compare to what the Bears should be rolling out in 2024. Since 2010, there have been 10 quarterbacks being drafted number 1 overall, and I do think that where the Bears are at now clear some of the roster talent that was in place for some of these former guys. So I'm not even mentioning the dreadful situations. I went through and listed out some of the offenses that could be at least comparable to the Bears in this sense. In 2019, the Cardinals drafted Kyler Murray with the 1st overall pick. They had some name recognition for sure in Larry Fitzgerald, David Johnson, and Christian Kirk, but Larry Fitzgerald was 36 at this point and retired a season later after 2020. David Johnson was 3 seasons removed from his All-Pro selection. He totaled just 345 yards on the ground across 13 games. Kenyon Drake was actually the leading rusher for that team. Christian Kirk was an emerging young player. was a legitimate second option, had over 700 yards, but no other player outside of Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald had over 400 receiving yards. The team was 5-10-1, and ultimately we still are yet to see Kyler Murray really be able to have a ton of a supporting cast around him. It's been a lot of moving parts over the past handful of seasons, and he's already on his second head coach. In 2015, the Buccaneers drafted Jameis Winston. Now, they did have all-pro running back Doug Martin at the time, who was in the peak of his career. Mike Evans was in his second season, caught over 1,200 receiving yards. An older but solid Vincent Jackson. But outside of that, there really was not much in Tampa Bay that year. They did have a Pro Bowl guard, at least in Logan Mankins, but were starting a couple young players as well on the offensive line beside him. So not a great situation there in Tampa. 2012, the Colts took Andrew Luck, number 1 overall. This was the final great year of Hall of Fame receiver Reggie Wayne's career, over 1,300 yards, the last time he was selected to a Pro Bowl. So he was, of course, on his last legs there. They did have a rookie, T.Y. Hilton, who was also drafted in that same class of Andrew Luck. He had 861 yards, 7 touchdowns. He became a perennial Pro Bowler a couple seasons later, so that was a big benefit for Andrew Luck. Another rookie running back starting here, Vic Ballard. He was out of the league by 2014. Really, his rookie season in 2012 was his only productive year of his career. And obviously, when you talk about the situation that Andrew Luck came into when he was emerging in the league, the talent was clearly there, but he had to retire early because the offensive line was a mess there. He was dealing with serious injuries, and he ended up retiring in 2019, right before the season. So you definitely cannot say the Colts did right by him then. 2011, you had the Panthers drafting Cam Newton. Now, I think this is the top rival in terms of supporting cast for a number 1 overall quarterback. You had Steve Smith Jr. in the last Pro Bowl season of his career, but he was incredible for them that year. Brandon LaFell was a pretty decent second option at that time as well. You had a young Greg Olsen, a really nice run game between D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, a Pro Bowl center in Ryan Khalil. And again, I think that this is probably where your biggest competition in terms of a supporting cast for a number 1 overall pick in the last decade or so comes from. But also important noting when you look at these scenarios where outside of Ron Rivera with the Panthers, the head coaches for these other teams were all gone within 5 seasons or less. So Cam Newton was the only one who got real stability at the head coach. Now, Matt Eberflus for the Chicago Bears is still a little bit of a question mark. The Bears are just 10-24 in their 2 seasons with him as the head coach. But I did think that the team was rounding a corner during the year. We saw when Justin Fields went down with an injury, Bagent was able to step in and actually help them still win a game or two, which, as much as the story of Bagent was a lot of fun, I thought it was more so about the defense that was really elevated over the second half of the season. Like we mentioned in the first segment, they traded for Montez Sweat, who was massive for their edge rush during the latter half of the season. They allowed 20 points or less in the last 6 games of the year. The team went 4-2 in that stretch. Keep in mind, his history as a coach in the NFL is on the defensive side of the ball. But I do think that there could potentially be something there with Eberflus. We'll obviously have to see. But really, outside of maybe some question marks at head coach. Maybe you don't believe in Ryan Poles, the general manager, but I think it's the logo with the Bears that can be a little bit scary, because they are, in fact, the one franchise in the NFL that is yet to have a 4,000-yard passer in their history. And keep in mind, the Bears have been in the NFL as long as anybody, and this is the reality of the situation for them. They have used first-round picks on 4 quarterbacks since 1999, so the past 25 years. Cade McNown, Rex Grossman, Mitchell Trubisky, and Justin Fields. The jury is obviously still out on Justin Fields, but outside of that, the other 3 were big-time busts, and based on the history of the franchise, I can't say I have the utmost confidence in the Bears being able to develop a quarterback, but they have all the tools they could possibly need for whoever steps in at quarterback for them next season, where you have 2 really good receivers. Again, Keenan Allen, yes, he's now in his 30s, and you wouldn't expect his prime to be upon him, but he had debatably the best season of his career. That's what he single-handedly called it in his press conference the other day after being traded to the Bears, where he was able to actually play in the majority of games. Still 13, which isn't, tremendous, but someone who's dealt with injuries a lot through his career, plays 13 games, set a franchise record with the Chargers for receptions in a single season with 108, 1,243 yards, 7 touchdowns, and now you're pairing that along with a DJ Moore, who we saw some of the individual games with him were just ridiculous, where he made things so much easier for Fields, which is the whole idea of going out to get weapons for your young quarterback, where the decisions are that much easier for you. Just get them the ball and they will fly. Moore had the most yards he's ever had in a single season, where he had 1,364, 8 touchdowns as well. And I just think that this is a good scenario. Now, I'm not the biggest DeAndre Swift fan in the world, but a very viable option in the backfield as well. Off the top of my head, I don't remember whether or not they still have the likes of a Khalil Herbert, who I am a fan of in the run game as well. So I'm going to do a quick double check on that. But again, Swift should be a fine option. They do have Khalil Herbert still. They also still have Roschon Johnson, who also flashed at times for them. So to RG3's point about Caleb Williams should demand he goes somewhere else, I just feel like you look at the other teams that are in need of a rookie quarterback, and where are you really trying to go outside of if he ended up in Minnesota? I could understand that. You get paired with Justin Jefferson. That would be amazing to watch. But the top 3 picks are all going to be quarterbacks. The Bears are definitely taking one. The Commanders are definitely taking one. I think that they've made some steps in the right direction in terms of adding a little bit of extra help on the offensive line. Austin Eckler, his best years are behind him, but maybe he can be a decent addition alongside Brian Robinson Jr. in terms of running backs that can be effective in the pass game as well. And the Patriots, who have tons of holes at offensive line and in the receiving game. So I think the Bears blow these other top 3 teams out of the water in that type of a position. And again, it's the Bears, and they're in a tough position in terms of they haven't had elite quarterback success throughout their entire history. You do have to hold that against them, but I don't think that it's a new regime here in Chicago, and I'm not saying I'm all in on them necessarily. I still really like the Lions. I still really like the Packers. So it's not like their division is wide open either, but I feel like there is definitely room for success there, in Chicago, and I don't think that comparing what just happened to Justin Fields to the reality of where they're at today is necessarily fair. Again, Justin Fields, I think he gets a ton of slack. He doesn't get the blame necessarily that he maybe deserves through his career. Now, again, the Bears definitely didn't do him tons of favors when he was in town for them, but at the same time, he wasn't the level of prospect that Caleb Williams is, and there's way more talent on that roster now than there was when Justin Fields first came in, and I do think that this Chicago team could potentially be, in the area. Also, you keep in mind, too, with the NFC right now, as much as I just said, I like the Lions, I like the Packers, you look at all the consensus best quarterbacks in the league are all in the AFC. Caleb Williams has a chance to play for a historic franchise and become the best quarterback in the NFC. I'm just saying it's a possibility. I'm sort of 50-50 on Caleb Williams as a prospect myself, but guess what? I'm not a professional NFL scout. I watch the games, I study all of it, but ultimately, my opinion on what a guy means is sort of irrelevant. I'm just looking at the situation as a whole that Caleb Williams could be walking into, and I think that this could be, again, at least in my lifetime, an all-time opportunity for him to walk into the NFL with an actual good structure around him. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the top remaining free agents that are out there in the NFL. So stick with us, and we will be right back.